Bruce Rauner has now kicked in more than $5 million to his own campaign while his opponents scramble to overtake him. We'll talk about it next on Capitol View. Welcome to Capitol View, the program where we talk about state issues, sometimes federal issues, and how they just might affect your life. I'm Bernie Schoeburg from the State Journal-Register. We have a primary coming up shortly, and we have a couple of people who make a habit of watching these things, which is great. Kent Redfield is back. He's Professor Emeritus of Political Science, University of Illinois, Springfield. Kent, welcome.
Good to be here.
And it's always good to have you when we're talking about numbers and money. You know those things. And Brian Mackey is here, State House reporter for WUIS at UIS, and also Illinois Public Radio. Brian, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Bernie.
Former newspaper guy when used to work just across the way from me.
Indeed, multimedia.
So there you go. Aren't we all these days? I was just posting audio on sj-r.com recently of Bruce Rauner talking. So there you go. Speaking of Mr. Rauner, who everybody in Illinois knows now, but we didn't really know him well a year ago, he has now spent more than $5 million of his own money on his campaign, which is over the $10 million mark, while the other candidates for in the March 18th primary for a Republican nomination for governor, Dan Rutherford, Bill Brady, and Kirk Dillard, are all trying to make up the difference. Of course, as we know, Mr. Rutherford, the state treasurer, has had some problems in his campaign, and recent polls show him in single digits. So you've got basically the two state senators, Kirk Dillard and Bill Brady, trying to say they are the heir apparent. They should be the one to get the support that Bruce Rauner, they hope, loses before the primary. How's it looking, Kent?
Well, Rauner still looks like he's in pretty good shape. I mean, obviously he's got a huge lead in terms of money, of which $5 million is his own. His opponents do not have a lot of money, and that's one of the things that really stands out. It's Rauner has got may spend 13-14 million. Bruce Gedwich in 2006 spent
Ron Gedwitz.
Ron Gedwich spent that amount of money in 2006, and nobody knew he was running. Virtually, he finished fourth. So it's a fact Rauner has been very effective in spending that money. And then compared to 4 years ago, Dillard and Brady have much less money than they ended up spending 4 years ago. So the difference is pretty stark. Now, Rauner is getting beat up by negative ads funded by unions and independent groups, but his numbers are still holding pretty good. You've got some movement down below, but it still looks like a race for second place.
Is that right? Yep. Brian, you agree?
The director of the Marching Illini over at the U of I used to have a saying, which is that everybody thinks they're the best marching band in the country, but they all agree we're the second best. And that seems to be what a lot of the candidates are talking about. Now, we've had in the past 2 weeks, both Senator Dillard and Senator Brady say, I think the other guys except Rauner should get out of the race, leave it to me, like you pointed out. But Mr. Rauner still has, I think you said, a 20-point lead in the polls, and there's only a few weeks left, and that's a pretty big gap to overcome. We've all been kind of waiting this year for this union advertising campaign that's been promised. They said they were going to drop a lot of money on this. Well, we're starting to see the ads, but there's a question of if it's too little too late. He's got such a huge lead. Like you said, a year ago, nobody really knew who Bruce Rauner was, and now he's got double-digit percentage point leads on all his opponents in every poll I've seen.
Interesting. I know that Senator Brady says he's the true conservative and has the base because he ran against Pat Quinn last time and has a network of people who are for him. Senator Dillard, I guess it was a couple weeks ago, got the Illinois Education Association to support him with something like 30,000 members. And just this last week, there was an event at the State House where he was announcing, and they were announcing support from the Illinois Retired Teachers Association. They made a little fun of the math because they say they have about 36,000 members, and the chart said 35,000. And Dillard, whose father was a teacher, was talking about he should be better at math when he's honoring teachers, as he always does. Do these things make a difference?
Well, they make some difference. I mean, organizational support helps, although there generally are more teachers voting in Democratic primaries than in Republican primaries, and money helps. And so to get on the air a little bit, that's going to boost Dillard a little bit. The negative campaign will pull Rauner down. But if it were Rauner versus anybody but Rauner, if those were just the choices the voters had, Rauner would maybe be in a little more trouble than he is. But that vote is still split. Rutherford's still pulling, depending on which poll, 8-10% of the vote. In a four-way race, 30% is a pretty good number.
And it's. I mean, yeah, like you said, it does help to have some support, and I think there will be a mailer for these retired teachers that'll be going to their members. I read, but on the other hand, this may be hard to believe for people who are watching a public affairs show on their local PBS station, but the vast majority of people, their only exposure to gubernatorial politics is through television ads. And no matter how many endorsements Dillard's getting, he still doesn't have enough money to really compete, particularly in the Chicago TV market, where Bruce Rauner has been running ads and building up his name recognition since last fall.
He's going to shake up Springfield. We know this,
well,
right?
We've heard this ad nauseum, yeah.
I'd like to point out, and partly because I've written a column about it recently, he really hasn't gotten to Springfield much. Certainly the two state senators in the race and the state treasurer are in Springfield a lot, so there are opportunities for reporters to ask them questions, to follow things up. Bruce Rauner, I think he was at the state fair, where he didn't want to answer a lot of questions that day because he wanted to talk about what he wanted to talk about. Later in the fall, he spoke to a Sangamon County Republican group at lunch and answered some questions. Where he didn't reveal some things and revealed some, including the next week it was a follow-up that, how he'd given like $500,000 to the Illinois Policy Institute, which supports many of the same things he does. What else? He was at the State of the State, a rare sighting, and then he spoke to reporters for a little while before getting off on an elevator as he was escorted by seemingly one of his people. And was there another event? There might have.
Well, there was a debate just a couple weeks ago.
And the debate.
Except afterwards, 3 of the 4 candidates stuck around and took questions from reporters, as is the tradition after debates. But he headed right for the exit and did not stick around and talk to people.
So is this a good way for a candidate to be in the primary, and if he becomes the nominee for the next several months as he fights for the general?
Well, right now it's a good strategy for the primary. He's sitting on a lead. He's being conservative. Sometimes when he's answered questions, he said things like, "I think we should lower the minimum wage," or that public employee unions are immoral. And so I think keeping him under wraps is probably what his campaign wants to do, limit the kind of exposure to making gaffes. Downstate has 35 to 40% of the Republican vote. I mean, it's a significant part of the Republican primary vote, and it would help Brady if Dillard were not. It would help Brady if Rutherford did not have 8 to 10% of the vote, because you assume a lot of his support is downstate. Rauner will have to get more specific when you get to the general, but right now it looks like he's sitting on his lead.
Interesting. There was one of these kind of technical insider-ish things that was done this week. There were a coalition of unions, I believe the AFL-CIO, and I'm not sure if it's beyond Brian, who filed a complaint with I think the Executive Inspector General, saying that because Rauner has a company that had a company that invests state pension funds, that he should not be allowed to donate to his own campaign, because people shouldn't be allowed to donate for campaigns if within the last couple years they have gotten state business. And so he's gotten state business, but he's donating to his own campaign. Is this complaint legitimate? Will it go anywhere or stop the onrush of Rauner money into the Rauner campaign?
And that's not likely. This is the pay-to-play law, and it is intended to eliminate conflicts of interest between people who are seeking state contracts in terms of prohibiting them from giving money, who have some kind of control over that contract. And so if in applying it to Rauner, you have to make the assertion that he is, in a sense, in a position to corrupt himself. And the Supreme Court is not going to go to that. Whatever Illinois law says, federal constitutional law trumps that. They've been very clear that you really can't limit self-funding. And so I don't expect that this is they're going to prevail. but it does get publicity. It does highlight the fact that Rauner's giving a lot of money to his campaign. It's talking about the company that supposedly had some connection with Stuart Levine in terms of pension abuses and corruption. So it plays nicely into the narrative. It has nuisance value. It's not likely that this Supreme Court is going to be very sympathetic to the argument that they're making.
And I did notice that the unions made sure to mention as they did this that this was a Blagojevich, anti-Blagojevich law to bring his name into the discussion of this year's governor's race, because nobody wants to be associated with that guy. Well, there is, that guy's lieutenant governor was Pat Quinn, who, when that guy was impeached and thrown out of office, Pat Quinn became governor. One of the things that he did, the Democratic governor Quinn, during the re-election campaign of 2010 was start something called his Neighborhood Recovery Initiative, which was an anti-violence program with money, I guess, distributed through people including aldermen in Chicago. And there was, I understand, a rather scathing report put out in the last few days by Auditor General Bill Holland of the state of Illinois. Brian, what did we learn, and how bad is this for Governor Quinn?
Yeah, I mean, not all of this was new. There was a big CNN story, I think almost 2 years ago now, that looked at some of these allegations where some of the money had ended up, or some of these people who were supposed to be involved in these anti-violence programs were marching in parades and things like that. The audit is pretty damning, though. It says the program was hastily implemented. One of the most interesting things is that this is an anti-violence program in the city of Chicago, but it says it didn't even go, the money didn't even go into all of the most violent neighborhoods.
And we're talking, isn't it like $55 million that was passed out?
Yeah, and so you had Republicans wasting no time. The report came out Wednesday morning, and by Wednesday afternoon they were holding a press conference in the Capitol talking about how this is a political slush fund for the governor. He hastily put it in just a couple of months before the 2010 elections so he could shore up support. And let's not forget, he was running against Senator Brady at the time, and he won a fairly narrow victory. Senator Brady came pretty close to beating him in what's thought of as a relatively blue state. But the Republicans are calling for at least an ethics investigation. Potentially, some of them said they hope that the U.S. attorneys might get involved. We would have a federal corruption investigation. And one of them, State Senator Matt Murphy, up from the suburbs, who's a Republican, he couldn't resist. A reporter asked him, "Do you think this rises to the level of an impeachable offense?" And he couldn't really help himself. I could see the press secretary for the Senate Republicans kind of shaking her head in the back of the room, but he said, "I think it needs to be explored." So, I mean,
nobody has filed articles of impeachment yet.
Definitely
if that's
not
the correct way to do it in the state,
definitely not. But I think you sense, the Republicans they pick their battles where they can, and I think they smell a little blood in the water here.
Probably fun for them to be fighting someone besides themselves and their four candidates for governor. All the candidates try to take on Quinn, but they of course have this other race.
And one of the reasons why this is serious is this is an audit report from Bill Holland, and Bill Holland is the gold standard in terms of Illinois state government. He is the one person that probably has credibility on both sides of the aisle, and he was a major factor in bringing to light the abuses of the Blagojevich administration. And so he's got a reputation as a very straight shooter, and so it's very difficult for the Quinn administration to kind of cast aspersions on the source of the audit because Holland has a reputation of going out and looking at these things very, very carefully. And it's clear this was put together very loosely, that
this anti-violence initiative.
Anti-violence program, that you probably were skirting kind of the limits of the governor to move money around. There are serious problems of record keeping in terms of where the money spent, who spent it. And there's kind of a little subplot because the governor worked through the aldermen rather than the Chicago legislators. And so...
and everybody knows Chicago alderman is where you want to give money to.
Right? Well, that may not be the best place in terms of...
Okay, that was a downstate kind of statement, sorry.
But
I'm sure there are good ones.
You've had African-American legislators who have been criticizing this program and seem to be at the moment more than willing to throw their Democratic candidate for governor under the bus because of the way that this has played out. Now, I don't think it's likely you're going to get any kind of criminal investigation concluded before next November. That just isn't the way things work in terms of the way the U.S. Attorney's Office looks at this stuff if there's actually an investigation. And ethics complaints, again, that tends to take a long time.
However, if they do like issue subpoenas and people find out, then it could be a continuing story.
Sure. And it just, if your narrative is that the governor doesn't pay attention to governing and isn't a very good manager of state government, then this is one of two things that has popped up this week that kind of reinforces that narrative that Governor Quinn really isn't a good manager of state government.
And let's get into that second one. Arthur Bishop was named to head Department of Children and Family Services after the recent death of Richard Calica, who was considered, I guess, a very good person to run that child protection agency. He unfortunately got cancer, passed away. Arthur Bishop was named, but he resigned this week after some bad publicity. Brian?
Yeah,
Tell us about that.
Well, so the Chicago Sun-Times and WBEZ, which is our public radio sister station up in Chicago.
Good to get a plug in.
Yeah, they've been investigating DCFS for a little while now, and they've been looking into a relatively high number of kids who seem to be dying in the care of DCFS. It's kind of a tragic story. As you mentioned, then the director had cancer and he passed away. There was Mr. Bishop, Art Bishop was put in there, and they started looking into him, and it turns out that in his past, many years ago, he had apparently taken money from some of his social service agency clients. And so there were questions about that. Then it was revealed that he had a daughter, and there were questions of did he pay child support. She says he was basically abandoned. In an interview she did just this week, as I understand it, the timeline was she agreed to the interview on Tuesday and said that she didn't really think it was appropriate for somebody who had abandoned his own daughter, in her way of phrasing it again, to be looking after all the neglected children in the state.
Was that front page of the Sun-Times? I think it might have been.
Well, yeah,
it was certainly prominent in the Sun-Times.
It was a very interesting timing because, at least in terms of public radio, I know the story came out, and within minutes, I got the notice that a new appointment had been made. And then later that afternoon, we also got the resignation letter of Mr. Bishop, it was fairly combative. He talked about, I've done exemplary work, but that's not going to matter. Political enemies are going to, be talking about this it's an election year, and so he decided to step down.
Interesting. I will say in his defense, I read one of the, some of the coverage, and he did say that he ended up, I think, pleading guilty to a lesser charge than originally charged with, because he said he didn't really do what he was accused of in taking money from clients who thought that, I think the allegation was that there was an alleged program, we can get you your driver's license back if you had a DUI, and then you pay money for that, and then nothing ever happened, and that he kept like $9,000. He claims that that's not the case, but that he couldn't afford the lawyers anymore, and just to get it out of the way, pleaded guilty to a lesser charge.
And, all of that may be well and good, but this is not the first time that the governor has had problems with appointments. And so there is kind of a pattern there that I think is probably going to show up pretty prominently in the campaign, that, the governor doesn't pay attention to government, that they don't do their due diligence in terms of vetting people, and that you really don't have, you need a businessman to come in and manage the state and apply those business principles. So, if you think of the kinds of narratives that you're likely to get from Bruce Rauner about how we need to reform state government, then these two things are not helpful in terms of, or they're actually very helpful to Rauner in terms of
and you're assuming Rauner, right? They'll be helpful to any Republican nominee.
Yeah, but any Republican that wins, but particularly if we're talking about we need an outsider and a business, and no more business as usual sort of stuff.
Interesting. I'm going to shift gears just a little bit. This is the first year under reforms passed because of kind of the goofy people who have been nominated in primaries for lieutenant governor, that candidates for governor had to name their lieutenant governor candidates on the ballot with them, on the primary ballot. So Steve Kim is running with Dan Rutherford, and Jill Tracy, who's a state representative from Quincy, with Kirk Dillard, and Evelyn Sanguinetti, who is on the Wheaton City Council, is the running mate of Bruce Rauner. Maria Rodriguez, who is a former mayor of Long Grove, is Bill Brady's running mate, and Paul Vallis, who most people know because he ran for governor and only lost by 20,000 votes to Rod Blagojevich in the primary in 2002, is Pat Quinn's running mate. Jill Tracy and Paul Vallis have state government experience. The others do not. How does this system look like it's working at this point? Are these, to me, I thought it might be a big factor who your lieutenant governor candidate is. Kirk Dillard clearly is trying to make it that because Jill Tracy is in the legislature and, at least
has a pretty good
reputation.
reputation. I mean, Jill Tracy has a pretty good reputation. She was on the small group of legislators who've been negotiating very intensely over the pension overhaul. I mean, I think she's pretty well regarded.
Yeah, of course, she voted for the pension overhaul,
and he voted against it.
Dillard didn't, so that's been a little dissonant. Well, we can't agree on everything, but she's a great person kind of a situation.
Right.
Is the public being better served by this system, or can we tell yet?
It's probably too early to tell. I mean, we have had some pretty good lieutenant governors, and we've had some not so good lieutenant governors. The office was set up as elected, so the first lieutenant governor elected was Neil Hartigan, who Dan Walker, the Democratic governor, was sure was going to spend the next 4 years planning to run against him, and so Walker essentially gave the lieutenant governor nothing to do, and the Constitution gives them it's pretty limited. And so, we didn't have a great record under the other system. This is a mixed bag. You can make an argument that it would be good to get someone who is, compliments the governor and one heartbeat away and all of those sorts of things. But I'd have to say there's not a strong, there's no tradition there. This is kind of a mixed bag in terms of the start. And, this is the way we do things at the federal level with pretty inconsistent results, I think, if you look at it historically. So there may, you probably need a vice president and a lieutenant governor, but it's not clear how the best way to go about getting that is.
Brian, have you as a reporter had any contact with any of these candidates for lieutenant governor other than Jill Tracy?
Well, Jill Tracy quite a bit. Steve Kim, I think I ran into him 4 years ago when he was running for Attorney General.
Against Lisa Madigan.
Yeah, exactly.
That didn't work out so well,
no,
but it got his name known, I guess,
right,
to that extent.
No, and Paul Vallis, I guess, had a press conference early on, but that was in Chicago. I mean, the thing is, I think you look at who Governor Quinn kind of surprised people. I think a lot of people were thinking he might choose a woman to appeal to female voters. He might choose an African American to appeal to African American voters, and it turns out he chose a guy who people can disagree about whether they like his policy ideas or not, but he's a guy who's very serious about policy.
He used to be the head of the Chicago Public Schools.
Chicago Public Schools. He was this big state budget official before that.
He was head of the committee. What COGFA used to be.
Right.
Which is the legislative arm.
Yeah, the nonpartisan budgeting arm of the legislature.
Right.
And he ran for governor, and like you said, he very narrowly lost on the Democratic side, and he's a serious choice. This is a guy that I think, again, whether you agree or disagree that he would have good ideas, people think that he is somebody who is at least competent to step in and assume the office. I can't say that I know that about everybody on the Republican side. One, we've hardly seen them. We've hardly heard from them. And, I mean, I don't know that being a Wheaton City Council person is, enough of a qualification to lead the fifth most populous state. I'd certainly like to be able to ask those questions. I single out Ms. Sanguinetti because there was a lieutenant governor's debate this week, and I don't think she even showed up. As I saw a picture online, they had an empty chair for her on the stage, and that's been another pattern of the Rauner campaign, not quite showing up to as many debates as all of his opponents are. But like we've said, he's got a comfortable lead, and apparently he feels that he doesn't have to. But so I guess the question is, I'm a little surprised that the lieutenant governor thing, as you had alluded to, is not more of a factor, because to me that is something where you gauge how serious the candidates are about taking this office, becoming governor, because as we can see with Pat Quinn, every now and then you do have to have a lieutenant governor who's capable of stepping up and assuming the top job.
Interesting. I saw, I saw that, was it President Cullerton that's interested in internet gambling in Illinois?
Yeah, that's right.
Is that something that we have so much gambling all of a sudden? Are we going to have more in that way, or can we tell?
We are going to recycle a gambling bill again, and the state needs more money this year than it needed last year. I mean, so we always have revenue problems, and so gambling is this kind of, it's not raising anybody's taxes, and so it's very attractive. There are all kinds of downsides to the way that we've done gambling
Which
expansion.
Anita Bedell will always tell you, who's the lobbyist
and
in Springfield against gambling expansion.
There's a question about how much money is actually out there. You're just recycling the players, but some states are making money at it, and so I think particularly if it looks like we're not going to extend the temporary tax increase, any source of revenue may become attractive.
Interesting.
Well, I was just saying, it's not just a question of are we going to have internet gambling. I think people will tell you we already have internet gambling here.
Will the
it's just
state
a
get its
question of
cut?
will you tax it and figure out how to make money.
Interesting. We only have a little time left. I just wanted to mention to those part of the viewership who would know Bob Murray, and I know, Kent, you were on his show many times. He was, in the last several years, on WTAX, a morning talk show host. 66 years old, was on radio in Springfield, had lived in Decatur, was a weatherman in Decatur. Really, and I think he grew up in, was it either the Quincy, I think the Quad Cities.
Yeah.
So a radio personality, passed away, suffered brain cancer. Just an unfortunate loss. He was a very nice guy.
Yeah, and just, a feature in around Springfield, emceeing things, doing civic sorts of things. I mean, just a really, really nice person, a good guy in a world where there aren't enough good guys, and so it's really tragic to see this happen and happen very, very quickly. So
yeah,
it is a loss.
I've been somewhat of an advocate just through my column of civility on the radio, and Bob was, and if nothing, I mean, he was, he wasn't a good person for advertisement. Very civil. You could not even imagine him ever saying a mean word to anybody.
Yeah.
Certainly not on the air, which unfortunately, other than the PBS guys. Or public
NPR.
radio, public NPR guys, you hear a little too much anger on the radio, and he was a person who wanted to give you information and not anger. So we wish his family well. Well, that wraps it up for now. As we approach the coming primary, Kent Redfield, Brian Mackey, thank you for your help telling folks what's going on. I'm Bernie Schoeburg, and thank you for watching. We'll see you next time on Capitol View.